Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, May 17, 2024. As National Police Week comes to a close, the U.S. House passes a resolution that, quote, condemns calls to defund the police, which has increased violence towards law enforcement officers. President Joe Biden commemorates the 70th anniversary of the Supreme Court's 1954 Brown v. Board of Education decision that ruled public school segregation unconstitutional, telling the audience at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, we have a whole group of people out there trying to rewrite history, trying to erase history. House Speaker Mike Johnson lays out what he calls the 7 core principles of conservatism in a speech to the Republican National Lawyers Association. We'll hear about the November elections from the head of the House Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Suzan DelBene of Washington State, at a Christian Science Monitor reporters breakfast, and from Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, at that Republican National Lawyers Conference. Frank Fahrenkopf, co-chair of the Commission on Presidential Debates, does a podcast with Politico on the decision this week by the Biden and Trump presidential campaigns to go around the commission and schedule their own debates. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas talks about immigration and border security at the Economic Club of Washington. And a bipartisan group of senators released a report on artificial intelligence, what they call a roadmap for government funding of research and also regulation. We'll hear from Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and talk about it with Politico's congressional reporter Ursula Perrano. Business Insider writes the House of Representatives easily passed a resolution by a 337-61 margin on Friday that condemned calls to defund the police and blame progressive policies for an uptick in violence against officers. 61 House Democrats voted against the resolution, while 134, along with other Republicans present, voted for it. The resolution, authored by Republican Congressman Pete Stauber of Minnesota, included several non-controversial provisions, such as clauses expressing condolences and solemn appreciation for the families of slain officers and recognizing the mental stress and strain law enforcement officers suffer. But it also included language that Democrats took issue with, including blaming decreased penalties and no-bail policies for opening the door to record criminal activity in cities across the country. That was from Business Insider. During the floor debate, Congressman Stauber criticized a statement made by Congressman Glenn Ivey, Democrat from Maryland, who was managing the debate time for the Democrats.
I want to read something to you. Quote, "It is not enough to hold the officers involved accountable. In the past year, police killings have reached a record high. Rogue, militant policing continues to run rampant across our country, threatening public safety and the lives of millions of Americans. Our antiquated criminal justice system has long allowed law enforcement to utilize excessive force and prejudicial policing practices while avoiding accountability. We need extensive reform now with de-escalation training, selective bias training, and better policing. I am urging my colleagues in Congress to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Additionally, we must invest in our communities through unarmed first responder agencies, mental health and crisis support treatment options, diversion programs, community intervention groups, and reentry programs. We can and must do better to avoid tragedies and improve public safety. I will never stop working to support and enact changes that will make our country safer for all Americans." The first part, this whole quote that I read, was from my colleague who's managing time on the other side of the aisle. That's horrendous, because the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act takes away qualified immunity. You take away qualified immunity from the American law enforcement officer, it will devastate our communities. It will devastate recruitment, retention, morale. You have to be kidding me. Mr. Chair, this is what we're dealing with. I became a law enforcement officer in late '94. When Ron Ryan and Tim Jones from the St. Paul Police Department were ambushed and killed. I was a young officer. I didn't even have my funeral uniform yet. But I went to those funerals wondering what profession I was getting in. even taken a second thought whether I should stay in this profession. 1 week on the job. In Cottage Grove, Minnesota, I was working the night shift. Myself and my partner at night, Tom Hewlin, stopped at a gas station, have a cup of coffee, midnight shift, talk about our families. We split up. He went one way, I went the other. Within 3 minutes, he's screaming for help. He needs help on a traffic stop. I couldn't get there fast enough. When my squad car got on that scene, the whole engine was shaking. I couldn't get to him fast enough. He was being attacked by the driver, the dog, and the female passenger was crying. We find out when Officer Hewlin went to make that traffic stop, the driver said to the female passenger, "I'm going to kill him." When Officer Hewlin went up to the window, the suspect was digging in his armrest, trying to get a handgun, and the female passenger was trying to move it away from him to save the officer's life. I got there during the struggle, and I looked 5 minutes before that. He and I were having a cup of coffee talking about our families and our futures. That's how quick it can change. And the cavalier attitude of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle is unconscionable.
Congressman Pete Stauber, Republican of Minnesota, on the House floor during debate on his resolution. His quote at the start of his remarks came from Congressman Glenn Ivey, Democrat from Maryland, who responded during today's debate.
I've got to say I am deeply shocked and offended by the statements that were just made, especially regarding me, but the larger context too. So the gentleman from Minnesota read a quote that he attributed to me, and it's a statement I made, but it was about the killing of Tyrese Nichols. Now, Tyree Nichols was the gentleman in Tennessee who was beaten to death over a period of like 10 to 15 minutes by, I believe it was 6 police officers. In fact, I remember watching the video, and there were multiple videos because they had different angles. One of the officers who had been beating him got tired, stepped away so he could catch his breath, and then came back to continue beating him. I'd never seen anything like it. I was shocked. I had cases when I was the state's attorney where police officers used excessive force, and I prosecuted those cases. In some cases, we convicted those individuals. But I guess my colleague from Minnesota thought that the beating death of Mr. Nichols was good policing. But keep something in mind. The chief of the police of that department fired those officers because he recognized that that had crossed the line that good police officers recognize and follow every day, under every circumstance and in every situation. I thought that's what we were going to honor this police week, to sort of hold up the Tyree Nichols scenario as an example of what police officers are supposed to be doing during police week is insane. I can't believe it. But that's what he did. Let me say this. It's important for us to make sure that we walk and chew gum at the same time. We want to honor good policing for sure, because every community needs it. We need police officers who go out and do they respond to calls for robberies or shootings or whatever. We need detectives who respond in homicide and rape prosecutions and investigations, both at the local, state, and federal level. We definitely need it. But even they've recognized over time that the bad apples, and the ones in Tyree Nichols' case were clearly not just bad apples, but about as bad as you can get. They have to be separated out because it's important for the police to police themselves. I know it's hard, but we've got to make sure that they do it.
Congressman Glenn Ivey, Democrat from Maryland. The House passed this non-binding resolution that, quote, condemns calls to defund the police, which has increased violence towards law enforcement officers, by a vote of 337 to 61, all the no votes coming from Democrats. This is a House resolution, so it will not go to the Senate. This is the final bill in a string of bills brought to the House floor during this National Police Week. Today is the 70th anniversary of the 1954 Supreme Court's landmark decision, Brown v. Board of Education, that ruled racial segregation in public schools to be unconstitutional. President Biden, in a proclamation, writes, "There is still so much work to do to ensure that every student has equal access to a quality education, and that our school systems fully benefit from the diversity and talent of our students, because diversity has always been one of our nation's greatest strengths." The president spoke today at the National Museum of African American History and Culture.
We know 70 years after Brown versus Board, there were some forces trying to deny freedom of opportunity for all Americans. A few minutes ago, I talked with some of the Little Rock Nine, who were determined to integrate a public school in Little Rock, Arkansas 67 years ago. I'd like to recognize them for their courage and their, if they can, if you're able, please stand and rise so we can all see you. Thank God Eisenhower was president. Thank God we had someone who stood up. The Little Rock Nine were met with vitriol and violence. Today, the resistance comes in other insidious forms. An extreme movement led by my predecessor and his MAGA Republican allies, backed by an extreme Supreme Court, gutted affirmative action in college admissions. My predecessor and his extreme MAGA friends are now going after diversity, equity, and inclusion all across America. They want a country for some, not for all. And let's not kid ourselves, folks. This is the God's truth, what I'm saying. My predecessor and his extreme MAGA friends are responsible for taking away other fundamental freedoms, from the freedom to vote to the freedom to choose. But I've always believed that the promise of America is big enough for everyone to succeed. And I mean that, everyone to succeed. That's what Brown is all about. That's what we're all about. That's what America's about. Let me close with this. On Sunday, I'm attending the commencement of Morehouse College, one of our nation's most important institutions. Morehouse was founded after our nation's Civil War to help prepare black Americans who were formerly enslaved to enter the ministry, earn an education, and usher them from slavery to freedom. The founders of Morehouse understood something fundamental. Education is linked to freedom. Because to be free means to have something that no one can ever take away from you. And that's the power of an education. That's why the Brown decision to commemorate today is so important. The work of building democracy is a possibility, of a democracy worthy of our dreams, starts with opening the doors of opportunity for everyone without exception. And we can do it. We just have to remember who we are. We are the United States of America. There's nothing beyond our capacity when we decide to work together.
President Biden at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington on this 70th anniversary of the Supreme Court's Brown v. Board of Education decision. Washington Examiner writing about this speech, saying it comes as his campaign is placing a concerted effort on courting black voters ahead of the 2024 general election in November. Polls have indicated that while Biden continues to lead former President Donald Trump among black voters, the president's support from that critical demographic has slipped since entering office in 2021. U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, outlined today what he sees as the core principles of conservatism. He spoke at the Republican National Lawyers Association National Conference, being held in Arlington, Virginia.
I would posit to you all what I call the 7 core principles of American conservatism. I think that if we set up a working group, a task force, and we did this for about 6 months, at the end of that, we'd probably come up with something that sounds like this. Here it is. I think it's individual freedom, limited government, the rule of law, peace through strength, fiscal responsibility, free markets, and human dignity. I said now under each of those categories, there are subcategories, but here's the thing. I'm not telling you that's the perfect list, but I'm saying that however you would articulate and define it, you need to be prepared to do that. We cannot just go out every day and say what we're against. We have to say what we're for. Like, what do we believe in? Because as Reagan said, the same great things that have guided our nation since its founding, we are now the stewards of the great things. You know, if it's not done by us, who will it be done by? And I would say the same thing to this room today. Like because of who you are and what you do, all of us, we all have a platform. You have influence. Many of you have a gigantic sphere of influence, and with all of that comes an extraordinary responsibility, I think. And I'm saying the obvious. I'm articulating what you know to be true intuitively, that there is a dearth of truth in the country right now. And people are just desperate to know what do we stand for and why. And those core principles, I call them the 7 core principles of American conservatism, but it's really the core principles of America. And they're under direct assault right now, you know, because while most of the country used to agree with these things, and we hear those principles, and it resonates with us. We want to preserve them. We want to conserve and defend them. There's also a rising number of people in the country right now that have open disdain for those principles. I mean, they don't revere them as you and I do. They want to replace them. There's a rising number of people that, this progressive wing and these radicals, and they want to trade America in to be something totally different. They envision for us to be some sort of European-style socialist utopia or something. It's Marxism, and we all know that's a fool's errand, a dangerous fool's errand. And so what we're in a battle for right now is not between the parties, really. I mean, it is. That's the daily skirmish. But we are in a battle, as I said earlier, for the vision, for the worldview. Like, who are we as a nation? And you cannot overstate the importance of that. And I think in this upcoming election cycle, this is a civilizational moment for us. This is a point of major decision to determine whether we are going to moor ourselves again to the founding principles of the country, or we're going to trade it in for something else. And heaven forbid if we make that latter choice.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, at the Republican National Lawyers Association National Conference in Arlington, Virginia. He went on to talk about a bill that requires proof of citizenship when registering to vote, which had a hearing Thursday in the House Administration Committee. Congresswoman Suzan DelBene, Democrat from Washington, chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, spoke today about the November elections at a reporters' roundtable hosted by the Christian Science Monitor. She started by laying out how many of the 435 voting House seats are the subject of serious focus because they're in districts with a history of close elections between Democrats and Republicans.
We have seen nothing but chaos and dysfunction and extremism this Congress from day one on vote after vote after vote on a speaker's election, being on the brink of a shutdown, brink of a default, brink of a shutdown, speaker votes again, even ongoing attempts to remove the speaker. Folks want to see governance work, and that's going to play a big, significant role at the ballot box. And we know that the agenda that Republicans are pursuing is a very extreme agenda, and that's not in sync with the American people. So we have a map of 65 races across the country. We have 29 frontliners who are the incumbents we have, who are in those purple districts, who have tougher re-elections. We have 20 red to blue candidates who are folks looking to flip seats across the country. And we'll have more as we get through primaries and that are continuing across the country. So we only need 4 more seats to take back the majority. And we are, it was 5, but with the win of Tom Suozzi in New York 3, we're 4 more. So we're working hard to do that and have an incredible opportunity.
Congresswoman Suzan DelBene, Democrat from Washington State, chair of the DCCC, Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, at a Christian Science Monitor breakfast with reporters. One of those reporters asked about the effect of poll numbers of the Democratic candidate who will be at the top of every election ballot this November, President Biden.
Can you dig in a little bit on the economy? Because polls show that President Biden is not faring well with the economy. Why isn't that resonating with folks more? And what do you have to do to kind of turn that trend around?
Well, I think folks need to understand who's done the work to help, for example, on those projects that are helping to fix roads, put broadband in place. All of that work was because of the work of President Biden and Democrats in Congress. But You've all seen Republicans go to ribbon cuttings and take credit for projects that they voted against. And we need to continue to make sure people really know who's done the work, that making differences in their communities. And we have to continue to talk about the work that we still can do if we have a functional Congress. There's a lot more we can do on issues of affordable housing or childcare, top issues that we see that impact families. These are things where there are great policy ideas we can move forward on, but Republicans aren't interested in moving forward on policy right now. They can't even agree with each other on most things. They can't even pass a rule to move a bill. So you over and over hear folks talk about this being a do-nothing Congress. We have a Republican majority that's been ruled by chaos and dysfunction, and folks want to see governance work. And I think that is a fundamental thing I've seen in every part of the country that I've gone to, and I hear regularly from folks who aren't just identify themselves as Democrats. Even a lot of folks who might have said they were Republicans aren't sure what they are now because they feel like their party has left them. They want to see governance work, and they want folks who are going to be serious about legislating. And House Democrats have been doing that all of this Congress, and we have great candidates that can help us take that majority so that we can have those gavels and actually govern again.
Congresswoman Suzan DelBene, Democrat from Washington State. An article from News Nation: the prospect of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. qualifying for the Texas ballot is fueling speculation that he could hurt Senator Ted Cruz's re-election chances, Republican from Texas. Kennedy announced earlier this week he gained more than enough signatures to compete in the Lone Star State, a major advancement for the independent candidate who appears to be drawing support from both President Biden and former President Trump. The development has also prompted questions about how Cruz could be impacted, with some observers arguing that voters who turn out to support Kennedy will likely back the senator's Democratic challenger, Congressman Colin Allred. That was from News Nation. Senator Cruz spoke today about his and the other 33 U.S. Senate seats up for election this year. Senator Cruz was at the Republican National Lawyers Association National Policy Conference in Virginia.
So what happens if we have a bad election, if we lose the White House, if we lose the House, and every seat in the Senate stays the same except one? The only thing that changes is the Democrats gain 3 points in the state of Texas. Let me tell you what happens in January. In January of 2025, the first thing that happens is Chuck Schumer comes back and he ends the filibuster. He right now has 49 votes to end the filibuster. He needs one more to lower the threshold for major legislation from 60 votes to 50 votes. If he ends the filibuster, he does 4 things in rapid succession. The first thing he does is pass S1. S1 is the first bill Chuck Schumer introduces at every Congress. It is a federal takeover of every election. It strikes down virtually every single election integrity law in the country. It strikes down every photo ID law in the country. It implements universal mail-in ballots in every state in the union. It legalizes ballot harvesting in every state in the union. It automatically registers to vote millions of felons, and it automatically registers to vote millions of illegal aliens. It is designed so that Democrats never again lose another election. By the way, your election integrity efforts become impossible after S1. The second thing Schumer and the Democrats would do is add 2 new states to the Union, D.C. and Puerto Rico. They want to do that because they believe those 2 states will elect 4 Democrat senators. That means if we start January with a 52-48 Democrat majority, we would end the year with a 56-48 Democrat majority. They would do that so they never again lose the Senate. The third thing they would do is grant amnesty and immediate voting rights to every illegal alien in America. If and when they do that, the instant they do that, my home state of Texas becomes bright blue. Every single statewide elected official in Texas loses when that happens. The governor loses, the lieutenant governor loses, the attorney general loses. We have 9 Republican elected Supreme Court justices. If every illegal alien becomes a voter, all 9 of them become Democrats. Texas becomes California. By the way, our governor, I think, would be Beto O'Rourke. And that doesn't happen gradually, it happens instantaneously. And the fourth thing they do is pack the U.S. Supreme Court, grow it from 9 justices to 13 justices, put 4 left-wing justices on the court. Now, I got to tell you, I am by nature, I am constitutionally an optimist. I believe there are brighter days ahead. I have no answer to that scenario. I view that scenario as a system-ending event. Throughout history, great nations rise and fall. And if that occurs, I view that as the end of the United States of America as we know it. What is terrifying is we are literally 1 vote away in the Senate from that.
Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, at the Republican National Lawyers Association National Policy Conference in Arlington, Virginia. Frank Fahrenkopf, co-chair of the Commission on Presidential Debates, was the guest on today's Politico Playbook Deep Dive podcast, talking about the decision from the Biden and Trump presidential campaigns to bypass the commission and schedule their own debates with CNN and ABC News. Frank Fahrenkopf was asked by podcast host Ryan Lizza about the complaints from the Biden campaign in a letter to the commission this week, explaining their decision. One of the complaints was that the commission failed to enforce its own debate rules.
Let's go to number 3 here. You're saying the commission includes rules that candidates were called upon to follow, and yet it was unable or unwilling to enforce the rules in the 2020
Correct.
debates.
And this is there are 2 things. As you know, we divide the 90 minutes into 6 15-minute sections. And under the rules, which they're agreed to, the moderator will ask candidate number 1 to a question about what's the taxes or whatever it may be. Candidate number 1 under the rules has 2 minutes without interruption to state his or her position. And then it's the turn without interruption for candidate number 2 to give their position without interruption. Well, Donald Trump broke the rule right from day 1. He didn't keep the word that he was going to keep the 2 minutes. He did it all through.
And the moderator, remind people, was Chris Wallace.
Chris.
And then at Fox.
Yeah. Oh, Chris. And Chris did such a great job on the last debate between Hillary and Trump 4 years before. I mean, poor guy, I felt sorry for him. I mean, you got to realize, I think, and we'll talk a little bit more about being a moderator and these things is a big deal. And I'll tell you a story about Sheaf later. So that was, now what were we going to do? Was I going to jump up on the stage? Chris did everything he could to say, you're not obeying the rules. You're breaking your own rules, Chris said. So I don't know what we could have done.
Yeah.
Now, I came up with a solution for the final debate. The other thing was, in order to get in the hall in the first debate, remember when this whole thing started, I said, how am I going to handle this with the health problems that we have in the country? So I got the Cleveland Clinic to host the first debate and also to be my medical advisor.
Right. You had all of us tested who were there.
I mean, no one could get in that hall who didn't go through 2 mags and be tested that day for the masks. And so when the families were introduced, the Trump family came in, they were masked, sat down. The minute they sat down, they took their masks off. The women put it in their purses. The men put it in their pockets.
This is the Trump family.
Just the family. Yeah, it was not just the family. There were supporters there who were part of their entourage who sat. With
which members of the family were there that took off their masks?
Well, Melania was there. I don't remember Barron being there. But I knew that the others were there with their girlfriends, those who weren't married, and so forth. Now, the Cleveland Clinic, because I had arranged for all this, immediately went out and tried to hand out more masks to put them on, and they wouldn't put them on. And
so what do you do in a situation like that?
So that's what I said. And one of the answers, I said, what was I supposed to do? Stop the debate? Call off the debate? Because they were in the audience. The candidates were up on the stage. And so they weren't happy about it. I was unhappy about it too. But
the Biden campaign was unhappy. They wanted them to be ejected or something.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. They'd love for me to go up and take them off the stage. And so that's where they were unhappy with in the rules I think that they're talking about. Let's see. This goes to the next page.
Yeah, I mean, they don't specify. It just
they don't say, but I think those are the rules they're talking about.
Yes.
Frank Fahrenkopf, co-chair of the Commission on Presidential Debates, interviewed by Ryan Lizza for Politico's Deep Dive podcast. A Politico article about the podcast has this. During our interview, Fahrenkopf, a former RNC chair, said he agreed with an analysis he read that argued Trump's acceptance of Biden's debate terms, quote, could end up being one of the great blunders of the entire election cycle. And someone called me this morning and said it was political malpractice. Fahrenkopf, again from the article, blamed Trump's short attention span. He suspects Trump made the decision to accept the Biden proposal without listening to his staff. He said he doubts Donald saw all the details. Asked for a response, the Trump campaign went nuclear, writes Politico. Trump advisor Chris LaCivita said in a text message to Playbook, Frank's political analysis is as relevant as the Commission on Presidential Debates is, which is, oh wait, done. The bottom line is we have debates that are a far cry more than an outdated Washington committee filled with a bunch of washed-up swamp rats could deliver. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Hi, it's Kayla from C-SPAN. Imagine 45 years ago when there was just a handful of television networks. C-SPAN first went on the air bringing an unfiltered view of government directly to America's living rooms. No spin, no commentary, just pure democracy in action.
And it's Greta from C-SPAN. It was a bold experiment. We finally had a front row seat to Congress, the White House, and the campaign trail, all without government funding.
As we celebrate 45 years and a legacy of unfiltered access, we ask for your support of a donation in honor of our 4 decades of service. Your gift, no matter how big or small, will help maintain this vital resource for access to the democratic process.
You can help ensure another 45 years of witnessing history unfold and empowering citizens to be informed and engaged in the political process. Visit cspan.org/donate today and join our 45th anniversary campaign.
Thank you for supporting C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government. Visit cspan.org/donate today to make your gift of support. Thank you.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app, and that's free. The Biden administration, writes Associated Press, said Thursday that a new fast-track docket in immigration courts will cut the time it takes to decide asylum claims from years to months for some single adults. Migrants who settle in 5 cities, Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York, will be placed in a recent arrivals docket that aims to have judges rule on their claims within 180 days instead of the 4 years or so that it currently takes. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas was interviewed today by the president of the Economic Club of Washington, D.C., David Rubenstein.
So you've been Homeland Security Secretary under President Biden from the beginning of the administration. So how many people would you say since that time have come in over the border, the southern border, let's say illegally, seeking asylum, they're bringing drugs, they're whatever they're doing?
I do want to differentiate because we're in a political environment that demonizes individuals encountered at the border, and there's a vulnerability to painting with a broad brush people who are fleeing and coming to the United States. And so I want to separate, and I will be incessant in this, separate drug smugglers from individuals seeking asylum, or even if they don't have a basis to remain in the United States, seeking a better life.
Okay.
And so the number of encounters have been very well published. This past month, we had about 134,000 encounters.
This past month, but let's say since the beginning of the administration, is it millions of people?
It's several million people.
The perception is by, I guess, some Republicans in the House side, perhaps maybe others, that more people have been coming in under President Biden than under President Trump. Is that true or not?
That is true. Now, in 2019, there was almost 100% increase in the number of encounters at the southern border over 2018. The situation in the hemisphere was propelling people to leave their country. 2020 was a period of tremendously suppressed migration throughout the hemisphere and around the world because of the COVID-19.
When people coming over the border illegally in the southern border, what percentage of them are really drug smugglers?
The majority of fentanyl over 90% of the fentanyl smuggled into this country is smuggled in passenger vehicles and commercial trucks traveling through our ports of entry.
So it's not people carrying it on their body?
It is not people carrying it on their body.
Okay. What about people who are hired, who want to get a better life? They hire people for money to get them across the border. Is that a big problem as well?
So let me go back and make one other point about the ports of entry. The majority of people arrested seeking to smuggle fentanyl into the country through commercial trucks and passenger vehicles are United States citizens.
Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, interviewed by David Rubenstein, president of the Economic Club of Washington, D.C. Story from Axios. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, will give the White House cover to use stricter immigration executive actions by resurrecting a bipartisan border bill for a vote, likely next week, Axios has learned. Schumer's move serves a dual purpose, also protecting his vulnerable Democratic incumbents on one of their worst issues ahead of 2024. Republicans are expected to overwhelmingly vote against the bill, which would provide new tools to restrict access to asylum when border numbers surge. The bill's failure would bolster the White House's standing to pull the trigger on similar harsh restrictions using executive authorities while blaming Senate Republicans for inaction. That was the reporting from Axios. Senator James Lankford, Republican from Oklahoma, was the main Senate Republican who negotiated that bipartisan border security bill. Senator Lankford spoke on the Senate floor on Thursday about the reports the bill will be voted on again next week.
Yesterday, we had 5,500 people that illegally crossed the border yesterday. Last month, we had 174,000 people that illegally crossed our border last month. That would have been the highest month ever. In fact, it would have been the highest month in the past 20 years if it wasn't for the last 3 years under the Biden administration. It would have been higher than any month under President Obama, under President Bush, under President Trump. It would have been higher than any of those months. But it doesn't beat even the records that were even set in the previous months before under the Biden administration because of their dramatic change in policy. We've had 1.5 million people now illegally cross the border this fiscal year. 1.5 million people. And they continue to be able to come across our border with almost no restraint. I've said for a long time, this is a serious issue that we need to address. My own party has said this was not the time to be able to do that. Now I'm hearing rumors that next week, the folks I was sitting down with to be able to have serious dialogue to fix it may bring bills back up again and to say, let's do a political thing on the other side of the aisle. Listen, if we're going to solve the border issues, it's not going to be by doing competing messaging bills. If we're going to solve this, let's sit down like adults and let's figure out how we're going to actually resolve this together. If there's a messaging bill that comes back, even the bill that I helped negotiate next week, just to bring it up again and to try to be able to poke Republicans in the eye for some sort of messaging piece, why are we doing this? All the American people see it. Everybody sees this is political, but everyone in the country also sees, why don't you guys and ladies fix this instead? Why don't you actually resolve it?
Senator James Lankford, Republican from Oklahoma, on the Senate floor on Thursday. New York Post reported this week that President Biden is planning executive action that would allow him to shut down the U.S.-Mexico border once the number of migrant crossings reaches 4,000 per day, a source close to the White House told the Post. And from the Washington Post, for much of the last year, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and a bipartisan group of his colleagues have been huddling with tech CEOs, civil rights leaders, and top researchers to develop an all-hands-on-deck plan to address the urgent threats posed by artificial intelligence. This week, the Senate AI Gang, as the group is known, unveiled the fruits of that effort, celebrating a sprawling 31-page roadmap that calls for billions of new funding in AI research as the deepest AI legislative document to date. But consumer advocates are furious about the final product, saying that the document is far too vague about how it will protect people from AI's harms, and that the senator's initiative is sucking up the oxygen from other efforts to aggressively regulate the technology. That was from the Washington Post. In just a moment, we'll talk about the senator's AI report with a Politico reporter. First, the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer at a news conference on Wednesday presenting the report.
This policy roadmap summarizes our findings and lays out a host, a huge number actually, of policy priorities our group believes merit bipartisan consideration by this Congress and beyond. And the word for this roadmap is balance. What do I mean by that? Well, our roadmap lays out the vital need for the United States to pursue and perfect innovation, but in two ways. Transformational innovation. That's the kind of reaching for the stars. That's saying that AI might wipe out cancer, eliminate world hunger, prevent us from being attacked. Todd Young had a great idea yesterday. Every kid could get a teacher, crafted to what their needs were. AI has huge potential. That's the transformational innovation we need to encourage. But there's also sustainable innovation. We know there are harms that can come from AI, whether it be hurting labor in the workforce, bias that's built into the systems, dealing with intellectual property. And so we also need innovation to come up with ways to minimize those liabilities. That's why we need both. And that's what balance means. Making sure that one does not take precedence over the other or stymie the other. Now, the roadmap doesn't do everything we as each individuals would have wanted. That's where balance comes in. But both transformational and sustainable innovation are embodied in this report. And I think it's important to have both.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, at a news conference on Wednesday. A headline at Politico, bipartisan group of senators unveil long-awaited guidance on AI bills. Joining us now is the reporter who wrote that, Ursula Perano. Thank you very much for being with us. What are some of these recommendations from the bipartisan Senate group?
Yeah, so this group has been working for a number of months to try and figure out areas that seem like they could have reasonable compromise for legislation this term addressing AI. So boosting funding for AI innovation was one of the top lines that we saw in this report, making sure to invest to make sure that America is competitive in the AI space. Additionally, we saw a lot of focus on using AI to strengthen U.S. national security and standardizing some AI safety and fairness standards across the board at the federal level. Additionally, we saw, some extra items about tackling these so-called deep fakes being used in elections where AI generates perhaps audio or imagery that can lead to a misperception in elections, and looking at bigger things, some broader concepts around AI like job displacement, where AI might push out everyday U.S. workers and sort of the effects on that. So it was very large and very all-encompassing. But senators felt what they found in this report and what they presented is very potentially that there is actual potential there for legislation to be doable.
How detailed does the report get on how they would address each of these issues?
So the report actually kept things somewhat vague in areas because it is compromised, not in a lot of areas that they firmly commit to pieces of legislation, and some they did. And Schumer also emphasized some areas that are perhaps of higher importance or priority than others. Like he said that addressing deepfakes in elections was something that was, high up on the priority list, which makes sense, and it's an election year, and we're seeing the use of AI in elections increase, as time goes on. But senators did try and keep, it open for committees to take what's in this report and shape it within their view. So sort of the idea now is that the report is out, it goes back to the committees, the senators on the committees can sit down and say, okay, this was the recommendations that was given to us, what can we do from here, and then sort of chisel it down from that point.
The recommendation for funding is $32 billion per year for non-defense AI innovation. Where did that number come from?
That was a number recommended by the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence in a report a few years back. Senators did emphasize that the report that they released recommends getting to that number over a number of years, so gradually increasing until they get to that $32 billion per year on non-defense AI innovation. I did ask about, the cost of that and trying to sell that to senators, particularly in an election year. That is a lot of money. And senators basically argued that this is an investment in America's future, and that if we do not spend now, we're going to be paying for it significantly in the long run.
We're talking with Congress reporter with Politico, Ursula Perano. How has this report been received by the stakeholders outside of Congress interested in AI?
There are definitely a lot of people who were very eager to see this report, and I think now people are looking for the opportunity to get into the nitty-gritty. A lot of sort of AI legislating had been on pause for some time, waiting to see what the recommendations of this report were, because at the end of the day, Schumer was part of this bipartisan working group. If he backs it, that says a lot about what might actually get to the floor. And so now I think there are a lot of folks eager to jump on and sort of ramp up legislating on AI this term. Whether that works, though, is sort of the big question. It's an election year. Senators are going to be gone for weeks at a time. And a lot of senators aren't going to be looking to vote on anything that could be perceived as controversial or things that come with government funding. And so the question now is, can they actually get legislation on the floor, either in a larger package or in individual bills before the end of the term?
And a final question, Senator Schumer has sort of made this a pet project. He's been giving speeches on it for 6 months or so. Did he seem to think that he is where he expected to be in this process at this point? Is he satisfied with it?
I would say that Schumer is definitely looking to push forward more on it. You're right that it's been one of sort of his passion projects, I would say. There have been a number of legislative issues this term that Schumer has repeatedly pointed to, saying that he wants to get them done at some point. Things like rail safety, marijuana banking, and AI being really high up on there. We hear him mention them a lot. I think obviously there were a lot of cans kicked this Congress on things like government funding having to get repeatedly brought up. Just last week, we saw the FAA sort of get dragged out for a minute. Congress, there was the supplemental with Ukraine and Israel aid that ate up a lot of time. So I think that Schumer is eager to make sure that the last year, potentially, of this term and of their majority, if it were to perhaps switch next term, he's able to get some of these priorities through. So I expect to see this be something that he continues to push for in the next few months.
Ursula Perano covers Congress for Politico. You can find her work at Politico.com and on X at Ursula Perano. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, Word for Word, and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.